Welcome to the Passion Business Podcast, the podcast for free spirits with a big idea who want to turn their passion into a business. I'm Anke Herman and I'm your host. My guest today is a communications and privacy attorney in Washington, D.C. and founder and CEO of WashingTech. Founded in 2014, WashingTech's mission is to fight for a safer and more trustworthy internet by teaching tech law and policy to everyone who wants to shape it. Welcome, Joe Miller. Hello and welcome, Joe. I'm delighted to have you here with me today. How are you?
I'm doing well. Okay, it's great to sit down with you.
Awesome. So let's just dive straight in and let's share with people where in this lovely world you're based and what's your business.
Sure. So I'm based in the Washington, D.C. area, a place called Fairfax, Virginia, which is where Civil War started. The first shots were fired in Fairfax, Virginia. That has nothing to do with my business, but it's just sort of an interesting anecdote. And I work on public policy, and I founded and am the CEO of an organization called Washington Center for Technology Policy Inclusion. And our brand name is WashingTech. And our mission is to teach technology, law, and policy to anyone who wants to shape it. So we're concerned with issues related to privacy and information integrity primarily. So we're interested in keeping ourselves safe online and helping the public understand what the policy debate is, because at times it can get very confusing. I remember when I started out in this profession, going to panel discussions and not really understanding what folks on the panel were talking about because they've been in the profession for a long time. And so they were using terms of art and technical language that I didn't really understand. And if I didn't understand it as a lawyer, then how could the public understand it and how could they participate in the discussion? And so that's why I've created this platform in 2014 to give diverse voices exposure to an audience, to amplify their voices because they weren't being heard in Washington, and also educate the public on issues related to technology, public policy. Our other issue, of course, is information integrity. We're very concerned about issues related to misinformation and what a lot of the states in the US are doing to attempt to prevent platforms from moderating and removing things such as hate speech. So we just joined an amicus brief before the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ended up making a decision on our side to stop the implementation of Texas's content moderation law, which would have done what I just described. Texas is a red state, and a lot of Republicans in the United States are concerned that these platforms are discriminating against conservative viewpoints in favor of progressive viewpoints. But the Texas statute didn't apply to platforms smaller than 50 million users. And so what that did is it created a loophole for smaller platforms that prioritize conservative speech like Parler to ban progressive voices, but at the same time kind of give a private right of action to citizens to sue larger platforms like Twitter if they argue that their speech was removed with a political motivation. And of course, we disagreed with that. And the Supreme Court there's a big battle about it and how to define viewpoint diversity underway. But through this initial round with the Texas statute, it looks like we in our coalition and our fellow folks, which include technology companies, were victorious in this particular case.
Well, congratulations. It sounds like such a difficult terrain to tread in especially, I don't know, it seems to be getting worse, that whole discussion and, the whole idea of manipulating information and withholding and, like half truth by not telling everything. And so it feels like a minefield. So you start, so you're a lawyer, right?
I am.
How did you like, how did you decide to start your own, like that kind, like, I'm just, my mind's going back to the year 2000, right? So where this whole thing about sort of policies, and in the year 2000, like everybody had to write up all these things, and there was literally, especially in the software world, nobody wanted to do that. So you seem to have jumped headfirst into an area that everybody else wants to kind of stay away from. Am I right with that?
I'm to a certain extent. I mean, there are a lot of different areas that are important in technology. One of them, of course, is intellectual property, where they can kind of stay away from some of the privacy issues and misinformation issues. But to the extent that these things are shaping our debate, there are a number of people, and it's interesting that you raise that issue because they are not easy issues. We have to deal with a lot of issues related to race and ethnicity, gender, and sometimes those issues are very difficult to navigate and figure out how aggressive an organization like mine is going to be. So that can make it difficult, but this is the field that I've always been in. I started out working in broadcasting, though, at a classical radio station in New York that was owned by the New York Times at the time. Now it's owned by WNYC, which is the public media flagship in New York City. And I remember this was, I'm dating myself, but this was my first job in 1997, and the internet was just sort of coming about. So I'm almost like an embodiment of the internet, if that doesn't sound too weird, because I started out my career in the beginning and now I've just kind of gone along and evolved along with it. And I went to law school at night, and in my last year of law school, September 11th happened. I was working at McGraw-Hill at the time and watched September 11th through my office window. And that's really, kind of the catalyst for everything that we've seen since then. But now the discourse has changed in ways that I think none of us really anticipated in the sort of the wild west of the internet, when folks were really optimistic about it being a platform to amplify voices and allow folks like you and I to create our own businesses. And so we've always advocated for policies such as net neutrality that continue to allow us to have the ability to have our own businesses and have our own platforms online without having to pay the same amount or having to have paying for bandwidth become a barrier to small businesses that can't necessarily afford that when they're first starting up. So that's why we supported efforts to have these net neutrality rules, but they were overturned under the Trump administration. And now we're sort of evolving now we're in dealing with privacy and Section 230, which is another statute in the US that's being misinterpreted in some ways. We can get into that if you like. And then, now we have to talk about policy in the context of misinformation and propaganda and what that's going to mean under the First Amendment.
So as a company, so who's your client? Who pays the bills, basically? Who pays you for your services?
So we are based in Washington, like I said, which is a very different environment from somewhere like Oakland, which seeks funding has the ability and the luxury of seeking funding from, and I'm talking about Color of Change now, has the luxury of getting funding from foundations, because they don't have to deal with this perception of being quote unquote bought by corporations. But, from my perspective, we've done a lot of work with Google over the years, and Google was the first organization, with corporate or foundation or otherwise, that ever took diversity and inclusion in technology public policy discussions seriously. So we're aligned with folks who are serious about having our voices at the table and having us be influential, and enabling us to speak our mind while at the same time promote policies that are going to be sort of beneficial for everyone. There are a lot of factors that we need to consider in a capitalistic society that are uncomfortable. There, like I said before, there are issues at the intersection of capitalism and race that we have to constantly grapple with. But the folks we seek support from are foundations, but we also seek support from corporations like Google, that we think have done a lot of good work with us anyway in the policy debates around this and bringing us to the table in terms of public policy making. But from some of what we've seen in terms of diversity and inclusion, that kind of thing has been problematic. So we have to kind of, toe this line between being against some of what they've done, such as the firing of Timnit Gebru for exposing what they were doing with algorithmic bias. And then also really saying that in this public policy discussion, they really were the first company to bring diverse voices to the table. And whether it's part of their strategy or whatever it is, again, this is Washington, and if it's part of their strategy, I don't see where the ethical problem lies. But that's what we navigate. We have to navigate Washington, D.C., in which we simply cannot afford and we're not in a position to seek exclusively foundation support, and then individuals, of course. So we just built a membership program that folks can join to learn more about tech policy, and we bring in diverse voices from across the political spectrum and from various different disciplines. On our podcast, which we've been doing since 2015, we bring scholars on the podcast from all over the world whose voices were never heard before, and we've had more racial, ethnic, and gender diversity on our program probably than any other quote unquote think tank in Washington, D.C. Prior to COVID and after the COVID-19 pandemic, now that we're in this virtual world where we can have a lot more of these discussions online.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm curious about what sparked the idea to even create this project, and who's the first person or the first organization who trusted in you? When you first transition and you don't really you need somebody to trust in your capabilities without having the proof of past project. What was that first project like? And I mean, what sparked the idea? When did you know I'm going to build something here?
I started as a fellow at an organization called the Multicultural Media and Telecom Council, and it was the only nonprofit in Washington that brought diverse voices to the table. They work with telecom companies like Verizon and AT&T to talk about things related to broadband access and broadband adoption. And again, they're in a position where they too need to navigate this space that just comes with the territory of being located in Washington. And their board is comprised of prominent, diverse partners and other leaders in the telecom and technology space that are advocating on these issues. And so I started in that role, writing filings before the Federal Communications Commission, dealing with issues related to broadcast ownership diversity and increasing the number of broadcast stations owned by people of color and women in the United States, which is still statistically zero after almost 100 years of media regulation in the US. And then as we evolved, started working on issues related to broadband affordability, really worked on antiquated issues like the emergency alert system, antiquated, obscure issues, but that were important issues, such as making emergency alerts on broadcast stations, doing them in English and Spanish, or advocating against a radio station ratings system that inadequately counted the voices of marginalized communities across the U.S. Because I'm trying to remember how that algorithm was designed, but I appeared before the New York City Council because of the way it was being implemented and how it affected stations that were owned by diverse broadcast owners. And so that's how I kind of cut my teeth on that. I went to work for a think tank called the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies, which was founded in 1971, which focuses on issues of concern specifically for African American communities. And I co-directed their Media and Technology Institute along with a very prominent scholar whose name is Nicole Turner-Lee, who's now at the Brookings Institute and is very influential here in Washington. Then in 2014, the Joint Center, ran into some difficulties and laid off their entire staff. And so that was kind of the catalyst for, if I'm going to start a business, I'm going to start it now. And we actually started as an LLC and then converted to a nonprofit in 2020. But again, it goes back to always having in the back of my mind this experience where I went to an event to learn about tech policy and didn't understand yet any of the language that they were using or any of I do now. And so just kind of sitting there wondering, if I didn't understand it as a lawyer, how can folks who don't have legal training or who haven't worked even in a broadcast station, how could they understand and impact these issues?
Sometimes I'm thinking, I can't believe we're in, 21st century and this whole question of equality is still a discussion. What's your take on that? I'm just like, this should not be even a topic anymore,
Yeah. I think if in the best case scenario, the best way to talk about race is to not talk about race, but that's not possible because we have to continue to track the disparities that are a result that go all the way back to the transatlantic slave trade. These effects are still felt because the assets were passed down from generation to generation and reinvested repeatedly, compounded interest over many, many generations that excluded people of color. The Civil Rights Act wasn't passed until 1968. And so we're talking about only a few years of quote unquote equality since the transatlantic slave trade ostensibly ended in 1865, except for prisoners here in the United States. It doesn't apply to prisoners. So we don't have an equal society by any stretch of the imagination. And the reason we're still talking about it is because the effects are still there. The geographic effects are still there. The footprints, and think of it as an archaeologist, the artifacts are all still there and affecting how our communities are, how our school boundaries are created. We have segregation problems here in Fairfax County that I've been advocating about separately. And it's just, when you do this work, you almost have to approach it like a scientist, because it's not all this idea of critical race theory. I think of them as critical race facts. These are facts that we're dealing with of how these structures continue to play out in society.
I guess if you, that's a very good point. If you sort of think about how recent the change is actually historically, it is actually quite a short time, really. There's not that many generations. That makes total sense.
And so look, there's been a long.
How do you keep your enthusiasm going? Because it feels like an uphill battle. It's just so much hard work. It feels like there's so much effort involved in making the tiniest progress. How do you keep your enthusiasm for? Because you've been in it for a very long time, so you obviously find a way to keep your enthusiasm. How do you do it?
I just wanted to make one last point, and because I don't want it to come across like it's only people of color that have problems, because ever since the planters were here and they had their plantations, they needed to figure out a way to prevent white folks and Black folks from coming together and combining and ending slavery and ending the plantation model that they were implementing, and their successors have continued to implement. So I just wanted to say that at first that divisiveness has been instilled and continues to be instilled over many generations. How do I stay motivated? I mean, it's not easy, because I'm not dealing with selling something like consulting that has where someone comes to the site and says, okay, good, I know what this is. It's really something that we have to work hard to make clear and articulate the relevance for regular folks. But I just the conventional wisdom and the wisdom I try to follow, and I'm not always successful out, is fitness and getting enough sleep and meditation, because it's really important to have a sense of perspective when you're dealing with extremely contentious issues day in and day out.
Yeah, that's so true. It's like you're not selling an easy product. It's not like, hey, I built your website, and at the end you have a website, right? So it's like it's a much bigger topic where, yeah, you have to do a lot of work and continuously. Now, I had a look at your website, and the first thing I saw was like, okay, how to keep your children safe on the internet. I mean, that's an enormous topic, isn't it? It feels like, in so many ways, sometimes you think, well, younger generations, they have it kind of so much easier in so many ways. But when you look at it, oh my God, I think we had it a lot easier, that there wasn't that jungle out there of call it predators. So what's your perception of the whole space, and how is it developing? Where is it going? What's your best advice for parents?
Well, we have a checklist that folks can find at techpolicypodcast.org/safety check that gives parents 8 steps they can start implementing immediately to protect their kids online. And those include things that they can do both on their computers, the hardware themselves, and how to set the settings on the hardware themselves, the parental settings, and then also reviewing what some of the policies are with the companies themselves, so that parents and caregivers can understand more about how each platform, whether it's TikTok, Twitter, or whatever it is, what control mechanisms they have in place and what they're doing to make sure that predators don't have access to our kids online. One other platform that hasn't been included in these debates is Discord. Another platform is the gaming platform Twitch. Policymakers have focused sort of on these larger platforms. There are all these niche platforms that are affecting kids, and not just affecting their safety in terms of predators having access to them, but we also consider misinformation and disinformation that's published to reach them, whether it's legal or not, whether it violates Children's Online Protection Act or not. That's designed to change the way they think about issues related to race. I mean, a parent asked me recently, how do I prevent my kids from becoming racist? What can parents do? And there's only so much parents can do at home. A lot of it has to do with the information that they have access to. And so when we think about online safety, we're talking about typical privacy policies and looking at the settings that these companies have in place, but also in advocating for public policies that preserve information integrity, so that we are dealing and that people can rely on the internet to be providing them with facts as opposed to having diverse viewpoints positioned as theories. Some things clearly are theories, but how do you build trust with communities that are prone to believing misinformation and disinformation, like Pizzagate or issues like that? Mars is, aliens and things like that. Those things are kind of fun to think about as entertainment, but they're not facts. So
what's like, say, if you look back, like at the whole trajectory, what's like, if you could go back, what's one thing you wish somebody had told you when you first started out this whole project of embarking on that mission? What was one thing, if you think, oh boy, I wish somebody told me that one before?
Don't do it. No. Why are you doing this? I'd have, let's see, what's a piece of advice that I wish someone had told me? Got some pretty good advice starting out.
Well, then want something that you did get.
Yeah, that's a really hard question. But I would say that you really have to, this is a political town and you never know who's going to be in power at one, from one administration to another. And this is advice that I did get, and I've done to the best of my ability, but at the same time, it's like things have to be said, and they have to be said plainly when folks cross a line. And, from the perspective of myself as a civil rights lawyer, we've had organizations that attack our communities publicly with, some of these quote unquote reports that aren't produced by any people of color on staff. And so when you attack our communities without the input of people of color, those things need to be called into question. But for the most part, it's important to maintain relationships as much as you can on both sides of the aisle, which people have varying levels of success doing.
I bet it's a minefield, isn't it? So what have you got planned for the next couple of years? Like, where you see yourself and your company in it next year or so?
Yeah, so we have a strategic plan in place to, first of all, fundraising is our number one priority. We've got to constantly grow and build. We've got to constantly grow and build our audience with our podcast. We have to continue to think about ways to articulate these very wonky and objectively boring policy discussions to folks in a way that actually makes sense for them and impacts their lives and their businesses. One of the issues that impacts our businesses is this idea of privacy by design, and how a lot of platforms, including yours and mine, have to kind of put privacy first in order to help your customers feel genuinely secure. They need to know not only that you're not selling their information, but making sure that when you say you're not selling it, that you actually aren't selling their information to anyone else. And so that type of thing has become more and more critical as we see privacy laws evolve. It's hard to say how things are going to change. Net neutrality will probably be an issue again. Broadband access and adoption are always an issue. First Amendment is going to continue to evolve with this concept of viewpoint diversity and how we're going to define this concept of viewpoint diversity in the US. So in terms of a growth standpoint, we have our strategic plan in place and building engagement. But as far as knowing what the policy issues are going to be 4 or 5 years out, it's really hard to say at this point, but we continue to grow with them and evolve and try to make sense to regular folks.
Awesome. And so where can people go and find out more about the project and get in touch with you? What's the best place to find you?
So they can find me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is JOSSMNY. And our company handle is WashingTech on Twitter. They can find us on Instagram with the same handle. And it's WashingTech, not Washington Tech. So
I just love it.
Like Washington
yes,
with tech. Cool. So I get that a lot. And then, of course, you can find us on WashingTech.org. Our podcast is techpolicypodcast.org. And on there, you can find links to wherever you listen to podcasts, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, whatever it is, you'll find links to the podcast there as well.
Awesome. Well, obviously, all that information goes in the show notes. But for the folks who are only listening, I love it then that you spell it out. Well, thank you so much. That was such an expedition in, for me, unfamiliar territory. So it was really fascinating. And I admire the tenaciousness you bring into this and the passion you bring into a topic that really needs all the attention it can get. So thank you.
Well, it's been great having you on the show. And I love your business and what you're doing and your story. So thanks so much for having me on, Anke. It's been really great to be here.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe and leave a review to help others find it. If you are a coach, speaker, or author, a passionate big picture thinker with a vision, and you want to build an online business to reach and impact more people, go to passionbusinesspodcast.com and download a free copy of my book, Taming the Tech Monster. And join my free community, Don't Just Learn, Create, Business Building for Mavericks, to connect with others on the same path. That's passionbusinesspodcast.com. I'll speak to you soon.